The Arizona Territory was a crack in the dry lips of the earth, begging for a drop of rain that never came. Under that July sun, everything baked. The dirt, the rocks, the very air you breathed. Fort McDowell sat in the middle of it all, a sad collection of wooden walls that had seen too much blood. Inside, the fear was so thick you could taste it on your tongue, a fine dust of pure dread that settled on the blue uniforms of the soldiers and the pale faces of the settlers. It was a place where hope came to die. Abigail Morrison, all of 19 years old, stared out at that brutal landscape. She was like a ghost in that fort, a whisper of a thing. Hair like spun gold, skin like milk, and eyes so blue they looked like tiny pieces of a sky that had forgotten how to cry. She didn't belong here, and everyone knew it, especially her father. "Get away from the window, Abigail!" Colonel Harrison Morrison's voice was like rocks grinding together. He was a man made of the same hard, unforgiving dirt as the territory itself. Years of fighting had carved deep lines into his face and left no room for softness. The Apache are everywhere. That devil, Kohana, has been seen near the river. The name Kohana was a secret thrill, a shiver that was only half fear. He was the most wanted Apache in the territory, a phantom that the soldiers talked about in low, angry voices. They said he could dodge bullets, that he could vanish into thin air, that he was more demon than man. But Abigail had heard the women talk too. The way their voices changed when they said his name. The way their eyes would get a little dreamy. That part she understood. "Yes, father," she said, her voice a perfect copy of obedience. But her eyes stayed fixed on the distant line of cottonwood trees, on the shadows that promised something more than the four walls of her life. The heat got worse as the day bled on. The colonel rode out with a patrol, leaving Abigail in the care of Mrs. Hartwell, a woman who fought the heat with a bottle of laudanum and long, silent naps. This was Abigail's chance. The cool water of the creek called to her, a promise of relief she couldn't resist. She slipped out of the fort when the shadows grew long and lazy, moving like a thief through the mesquite and palo verde. She'd found the spot weeks ago, a hidden pool of water, clear and deep, tucked away behind a curtain of willows. It was her secret church, her only escape. The risk was worth it. The heat was a prison, and the water was freedom. The pool was a jewel in the dusty landscape, so clear you could count the pebbles on the bottom. She checked the rocks, the trees, the silence. She was alone, or so she thought. She unlaced her heavy dress, letting it fall to the ground. The layers peeled away, her chemise, her undergarments, until she stood bare under the dappled sunlight. Her skin, untouched by the harsh sun, seemed to glow. She was a marble statue come to life, all soft curves and long golden hair that tumbled down her back. She stepped into the water with a gasp of pure pleasure. It was a cool kiss, a lover's embrace that washed away the heat and the fear and the suffocating boredom of her life. But she was not alone. High above her, nestled in the red rocks, Kohana watched. He'd been tracking the soldiers when he saw her, a flash of gold moving toward the creek. His first thought was a trap. A lone woman was too easy, too perfect. He moved closer, silent as a hunting cat, his powerful body gliding through the rocks. And then he saw her, and he froze. He was a man carved from the earth itself. 31 years of desert warfare had honed him into a weapon. Shoulders wide enough to draw a bow that would snap for other men, arms thick with muscle. His long black hair was a river of night, bound with silver and eagle feathers that told of his rank. His face was all sharp angles and high cheekbones, his eyes dark and intense. He was a beautiful, terrible thing, a god of war. He'd known women, Apache women with fire in their eyes and strength in their hands, but he'd never seen anything like the vision in the water below. She moved like a spirit, her white skin a startling contrast to the red rocks and green willows. It wasn't just her beauty that held him captive. It was the freedom in her movements, the wildness she couldn't hide, even in this quiet moment. It called to something deep inside his own soul. Abigail dipped her head under the water, her hair fanning out like a golden halo. When she surfaced, she threw her head back and laughed, a soft, musical sound that floated up to him on the warm air. The sound hit him like a fist to the gut. It cracked open a part of his heart he'd sealed off long ago, a part he thought was dead. She was the enemy. Her father wore the blue coat of the men who hunted his people, who stole their land and broke their promises. She should have been nothing to him. A target. A symbol of everything he fought against. But he couldn't look away. He found himself memorizing the curve of her hip, the line of her throat, the joy on her face. He was drinking her in, and he was thirsty for more. She started to hum, a simple tune that mixed with the sound of the creek. He closed his eyes. For a moment, there was no war. There was no hatred. There was only the woman and the water and the song. He should have left. Every instinct screamed at him to fade back into the rocks and forget what he'd seen. But his feet were rooted to the spot. He shifted his weight, trying to get a better view, a fool's move for a warrior of his skill. And that's when it happened. A small rock, dislodged by his boot, tumbled down the cliff. It wasn't loud, but in the afternoon stillness, it sounded like a gunshot. Abigail spun around, her hands flying up to cover herself. Her eyes, wide and terrified, scanned the rocks. And then they found him. Violet eyes met black. Time stopped. The air crackled. She should have screamed. She should have run. She did neither. She just stood there waist deep in the crystal water, staring at the most dangerous man in Arizona. And in his eyes, she saw no threat. She saw a hunger that mirrored her own. A fire that burned just as hot. He rose from his hiding spot, making no effort to conceal himself. The sun hit his bronze skin, turning it to gold. He was magnificent, terrifying, and completely, utterly real. The space between them hummed with a tension that had nothing to do with war and everything to do with the raw, undeniable pull of a man and a woman. Then, as quickly as he appeared, he was gone. He didn't run. He simply melted back into the landscape, becoming one with the rocks and shadows. Abigail was left alone, trembling in the cool water. But she wasn't cold. She was on fire. His image was burned into her mind. The intensity in his eyes, the power in his body, the way he had looked at her, not as an enemy, but as a woman. She dressed with shaking hands, her mind a whirlwind. She had just been seen, naked and vulnerable, by the most feared warrior in the territory, and she had never felt more alive. That night, she lay in her bed, staring into the darkness. She should have been terrified. She should have been telling her father, raising the alarm. Instead, she found herself wondering, why hadn't he harmed her? And a more dangerous question followed. Why did a part of her wish he had stayed? Out in the desert, Kohana sat on a high ledge, the stars his only companions. The image of the golden-haired woman was a fire behind his eyes. He was a war leader, a man of duty and discipline. But tonight, he was just a man, haunted by a ghost with skin like milk and eyes like the evening sky. For the first time in a very long time, he felt something other than rage. He felt desire. And he knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that it was going to get him killed. 3 days crawled by, and for Abigail each moment was a slow torture. The world had lost its color. The chatter of the fort, the drone of her daily chores, it was all just noise. The only thing that felt real was the memory of dark eyes burning into hers. She couldn't eat. She couldn't sleep. She just replayed the scene at the creek over and over, a silent film that left her breathless. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Mrs. Hartwell noted, her sharp eyes missing nothing over the rim of her teacup. "I'm fine," Abigail lied, her hand shaking so much the cup rattled in its saucer. How could she explain that she was haunted, not by a ghost, but by the living, breathing image of a man she should hate? That she went to sleep dreaming of his touch and woke up craving it? Her father returned that evening, and the news he brought sent a jolt of pure electricity through her veins. "Apache tracks all along the creek," he announced, his voice a low growl. "That devil Kohana is toying with us, leaving signs a blind man could follow. It's like he wants us to know he's there." The colonel's face was a storm cloud of frustration. "I'm doubling the guard. No one leaves the fort. No one." But his words were too late. A decision had already taken root in Abigail's heart, a wild and reckless flower blooming in the desert of her life. She had to go back. She had to know if the connection she felt was real or just a dangerous fantasy. The risk was enormous. The reward? She didn't even know. But staying behind, locked in her cage of safety, was no longer an option. The next afternoon, she slipped away again. The fort dozed in the oppressive heat, a sleeping dragon that didn't notice the princess stealing away. Her heart hammered against her ribs with every step she took toward the creek, a drumbeat of fear and anticipation. The pool was just as she'd left it, a perfect still mirror reflecting the sky. But the air was different. It was charged, alive. He was here. She didn't see him, but she felt him. A presence in the trees, a watcher in the rocks. This time there was no hesitation. She undressed with a slow, deliberate grace, her movements a silent dare. If he was watching, she wanted him to see that she was not afraid, that she had come back for him. This was her choice, her surrender. She slipped into the cool water and floated on her back, her arms spread wide, a willing sacrifice to his gaze. The silence stretched on. 1 minute, then 2. A seed of disappointment began to sprout in her heart. Had she imagined it all? Then she heard it. A soft splash behind her. She turned, and there he was. He stood waist-deep in the water, not 10 feet from her. The droplets on his bronze chest glittered like diamonds in the sun. He was even more breathtaking up close. The raw power of him, the quiet intelligence in his eyes. He had left his weapons on the bank. His long black hair was unbound, flowing around his powerful shoulders. They were just a man and a woman, alone in the world. "You came back," he said. His voice was deep, a low rumble that vibrated through the water, through her very bones. "Yes," she whispered. The word was a confession, an admission of a crime she was more than willing to commit. "I had to." He moved toward her, not like a man walking, but like a predator gliding through its element. "You should not be here. Your people say I am a killer." "Are you?" she challenged, her voice surprisingly steady. A shadow of a smile touched his lips, and it was like the sun breaking through clouds. It transformed him. "With you," he said, his voice soft. "I am only a man." The words hung in the air between them, a fragile bridge across an impossible chasm. He stopped, just an arm's length away, so close she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, feel the heat coming off his skin. "What is your name?" he asked. "Not the one the soldiers call you." "Abigail," she said. Then, a spark of boldness. "But I have another name, a secret one. Ayana." His eyes widened in surprise. "That is an Apache word. Eternal blossom." "I've been learning," she admitted, a blush creeping up her neck. "I wanted to understand." "Understand what?" he asked, and the question was laced with the pain of 100 broken treaties. "Why your people want to destroy mine." She took a step closer, the water swirling around her. "I wanted to understand freedom. Living behind walls, I felt like I was already dead. When I saw you, I saw what it meant to be alive." His control, forged in the fires of battle, began to crack. He had come here to watch her, to torment himself with a beauty he could never possess. He had not been prepared for this. For her. "You do not know what you are doing," he said, his voice rough. "Your father would see me hanged." "Then let there be no future," she said, her eyes locked on his. "Let there be only this." That broke him. He reached for her, his large hands surprisingly gentle as they framed her face. He searched her eyes, looking for any hint of fear. He found none. "Ayana," he whispered, and the name on his lips was a prayer. Beautiful, foolish Ayana. She rose on her toes in the water, her body brushing against his. "If this is foolish," she said, "I don't want to be wise." His mouth came down on hers. The first kiss was a discovery. Tentative, searching. The second was a declaration. A raw, desperate pouring out of all the loneliness, all the longing they had both held inside for a lifetime. His lips were fire, his arms steel as he pulled her against him. She melted into his strength, her hands exploring the hard muscles of his back, the power coiled in his shoulders. They broke apart, gasping for air, their foreheads pressed together. "This is madness," he breathed, his arms tightening around her. "The best things are," she whispered back, her fingers tracing the sharp line of his jaw. He took her hand and pressed it against his chest. His heart was a war drum, beating a frantic rhythm against her palm. "This," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "this is what you do to me. You make me forget who I am." "I know the feeling," she confessed. "These last 3 days, I thought I would go mad." But their shared madness was interrupted by a flicker of movement high in the rocks above. A flash of light, like sunlight glinting off metal or glass. Kohana's body went rigid. He pushed her back gently, his eyes scanning the cliffs, his easy manner gone, replaced by the lethal focus of the warrior. "What is it?" Abigail whispered, her heart suddenly cold with dread. "We are not alone," he said, his voice a low growl. He pulled her with him toward the bank, shielding her body with his own. "Someone is watching!" They scrambled out of the water, the magic of their moment shattered. Kohana moved with blinding speed, grabbing his rifle from the bank. Abigail dressed with fumbling, panicked fingers, her eyes darting toward the rocks where she had seen the flash. Who was it? A soldier from the fort? Another Apache? "You must go," Kohana said, his eyes still fixed on the cliffs. "Now, before they see who you are with." "But what about you?" she cried. "I will lead them away," he said, touching her cheek one last time. "Go back to the fort. Act as if nothing has happened. But Ayana, be careful. Trust no one." The urgency in his voice was terrifying. This wasn't just about them being discovered. This was something more dangerous. He pressed a small, intricately beaded pouch into her hand. "If you need me, leave this by the tallest cottonwood. I will find you." Then he was gone, a silent shadow disappearing into the brush in the opposite direction, drawing the unseen eyes away from her. Abigail ran. She didn't stop until the walls of the fort were in sight. Her heart was a wild bird beating against the cage of her ribs. Their perfect moment had been spied on, violated. Kohana's warning echoed in her head. Trust no one. When she stumbled back into her rooms, Mrs. Hartwell was there, pouring tea as if nothing was amiss. "My dear girl, you look flushed," the older woman said, her eyes glittering with a strange light. "You must be careful of the sun. It can play tricks on the mind." Abigail stared at her, at the placid smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. And she knew. The glint of light hadn't been a trick of the sun. It had been the spyglass Mrs. Hartwell always carried in her needlework basket. The trap was closing in, and Abigail was right in the middle of it. The fort was no longer a cage. It was a spider's web, and Abigail could feel the silken threads tightening around her. Every smile from Mrs. Hartwell felt like a threat, every casual question a carefully laid trap. Kohana's warning, "Trust no one," became her mantra. She clutched the beaded pouch he'd given her. It felt warm in her hand, a small piece of his world, a tangible link to the man who had stolen her heart. She couldn't leave it for him yet, not until she understood the danger she was in. That night, she feigned a headache and retired to her room early, but she didn't sleep. Instead, she watched her father's study. Hours passed. Then, just after midnight, a sliver of light appeared under his door. She crept from her room, her bare feet making no sound on the wooden floors. The door was slightly ajar. She peered through the crack. Her father wasn't reading reports. He was hunched over a large, hand-drawn map spread across his desk. With him was another man, a man she'd seen around the fort but never spoken to. A civilian scout named Silas with a permanent sneer and cold, dead eyes. They were talking in low whispers. "The main vein must be here," Silas was saying, his dirty finger tracing a line on the map. A line that ran directly through the sacred lands of Kohana's people. "The Apache are getting too close. Morrison, you have to push them back further." "I'm trying," her father hissed back, his voice strained. "But this warrior, Kohana, he's like a ghost. He knows these canyons better than my own men. He's interfering." "Then you need to give him something else to worry about," Silas said, and the cruelty in his voice made Abigail's blood run cold. "A real reason to go to war. Something that will force the army to wipe them out for good." Abigail's world tilted on its axis. This wasn't about protecting settlers. It was about gold. Her father, the Honorable Colonel Morrison, was provoking a war for profit. The raids, the fear, the men who had died. It was all a lie, a bloody stage play directed by the greedy scout at his side. Suddenly, her father looked up, his eyes darting toward the door as if he sensed her presence. Abigail scrambled back into the shadows of the hallway just as he crossed the room and shut the door firmly. Her heart was hammering. This was the real danger Kohana had sensed. It wasn't just about a forbidden love. It was about a conspiracy that would drown the entire territory in blood. The next day, she knew she had to act. She had to warn him. Under the watchful, venomous gaze of Mrs. Hartwell, she took her daily walk around the fort's perimeter. When she was sure no one was looking, she raced to the line of cottonwoods at the edge of the clearing. She found the tallest one and carefully placed the beaded pouch at its base, half hidden by a rock. A silent scream for help sent out into the wilderness. Now, all she could do was wait. And pray he found it before her father's treachery exploded. The dinner with her father that evening was a nightmare. Every word he spoke was coated in a layer of deceit. "I've been thinking, Abigail," he said, his face a mask of fatherly concern. "This land is too savage for you. I'm sending you back east, to your aunt in Boston. It's for your own safety." For her safety, or to get the only witness to his crimes out of the way. "I'll consider it, father," she lied, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. She knew she didn't have much time. Something terrible was about to happen. She could feel it in the air, a gathering storm of violence and greed. She had to get to Kohana. She had to tell him about the map, about Silas, about the gold. She had to trust that he would believe the daughter of his enemy. Later that night, as a sliver of moon hung in the sky, a soft scratching sound came from her window. Her heart leaped into her throat. She crept to the window and peered out. It was him. He was pressed against the wall of the fort, a shadow among shadows. He had come for her. The sight of him, so close, so real, stole the air from her lungs. He gestured for her to be quiet and pointed towards the stables. This was it. There was no turning back now. She packed a small bag in a frenzy, her hands shaking. Her mother's locket, a change of clothes, the little bit of money she had saved. It wasn't much to start a new life with, but it was all she had. Slipping out of the fort was terrifying. Every creak of a floorboard, every rustle of the wind sounded like an alarm bell. But she made it. He was waiting for her in the darkness of the stables, his presence a comforting warmth in the cool night air. "I got your message," he whispered, his eyes searching hers. "What is wrong?" "Everything," she breathed, the words tumbling out in a frantic rush. "My father. The war. It's all a lie. It's about gold. There's a map. A man named Silas is forcing his hand." Kohana's face hardened in the dim light. The name Silas clearly meant something to him. "Silas," he repeated, the name a curse on his tongue. "I know this man. He is a snake who speaks with a forked tongue. He trades with some of the tribes, but he cannot be trusted." "They're planning something," she said desperately. "Something to start a full-scale war. We have to stop them." "We will," he promised, his hand finding hers in the dark. "But first, I must get you away from here. They will know you are gone by morning. We ride north to my people. You will be safe there." He led 2 horses from the stables, their hooves muffled by rags he had tied around them. They moved through the sleeping fort like ghosts, every shadow a potential enemy. They were almost at the gate when a voice cut through the silence. "Leaving so soon, Miss Morrison?" They froze. Sergeant Martinez stepped out from behind a wagon, a rifle held loosely in his hands. He was an old friend of her father's, a man who had always been kind to her. His face was etched with conflict. "Sergeant, please," Abigail begged. "You don't understand." "I understand that you're leaving with the most wanted man in the territory," he said, his eyes sad. "The colonel will have my hide." "My father is the one committing crimes," she blurted out. "He's in league with a man named Silas. They're trying to start a war for gold." Martinez's expression flickered. It was clear he'd had his own suspicions. "The colonel has not been himself lately," he admitted slowly. "And this scout, Silas, there is bad medicine around him." "Then let us go," Kohana said, his voice low and firm. "Let us go, and we can expose the truth. If we stay, we will all be killed to protect their secrets." The sergeant looked from Abigail's pleading face to Kohana's proud, determined one. He was a good man, caught in an impossible situation. For a long moment he was silent. Then, with a heavy sigh, he lowered his rifle. "The northern gate is unguarded for the next 10 minutes," he said, not looking at them. "Go, and may God have mercy on all of us." They didn't need to be told twice. They rode, low and fast, through the gate and out into the vast, dark desert. The wind whipped Abigail's hair around her face, and for the first time, it felt like freedom. But as they crested the first ridge, she looked back at the fort, and her blood ran cold. A single torch flared to life on the wall, then another, and another. An alarm bell began to ring, its frantic clang shattering the night's peace. Sergeant Martinez had lied. It wasn't a choice, it was a trap. They had been sent out of the fort, only to be hunted down in the open. Hoofbeats thundered behind them, dozens of them. Her father was coming, and he wasn't coming to bring his daughter home. He was coming to bury his secrets. They galloped into the night, the hunt already begun. The open desert was a killing field, with nowhere to hide. "This way!" Kohana yelled, veering sharply towards a cluster of jagged rock formations. The old mission ruins. It was their only chance. The ruins were a skeleton against the star-dusted sky, broken adobe walls that offered little cover. They dismounted, their horses heaving, and scrambled into the maze of crumbling stone. Kohana pressed his rifle into her hands. "I will lead them away," he said. "Stay here. Stay hidden." "No!" she cried, grabbing his arm. "I won't leave you." "Ayanna," he said, his voice urgent, his hands framing her face. "You must. This is my fight." But it was too late. Torches flooded the entrance to the ruins, trapping them in a circle of hellish light. Soldiers poured in, rifles raised, and at their head was her father, his face a twisted mask of fury and betrayal. "Step away from my daughter, you red devil!" Colonel Morrison roared, his voice cracking like a whip. "Father, listen to me!" Abigail screamed, stepping in front of Kohana. "Silas is the enemy. He's using you." "Silence!" he bellowed, his eyes wild with a pain so deep it looked like madness. "You've been bewitched by him! Step aside, or so help me God! I will shoot through you to get to him!" The standoff was electric. 20 rifles aimed at one man, with the woman he loved as his only shield. Abigail knew in that moment that they were all going to die here. Her father was too far gone, blinded by greed and shame. But then, something happened that no one expected. An arrow hissed out of the darkness beyond the torchlight. It struck one of the soldiers, who crumpled to the ground with a choked cry. For a heartbeat, everyone stared, confused. Then another arrow flew, and another. But these weren't Kohana's warriors. The arrows were different, uglier, poisoned. A guttural cry echoed from the rocks above them, and figures began to rise from the shadows. Not Apache, not soldiers. They were rough men, Silas's hired guns, disguised in crude imitations of Apache war paint. Silas had played his final card. He wasn't just starting a war, he was eliminating all the players. He was going to kill the soldiers and blame Kahana. He was going to kill Kahana. And he was going to kill the colonel and his daughter, the only ones who knew the truth. Suddenly, the ruins weren't a trap for Kahana. They were a tomb for all of them. Gunfire erupted from the darkness, ripping through the terrible silence. The soldiers, caught completely by surprise, scattered for cover. Colonel Morrison stared, his face a canvas of disbelief, as he finally understood the depth of the betrayal. He had been played for a fool. "It's an ambush!" he screamed, diving behind a fallen wall. "Return fire!" The ruins dissolved into chaos. Muzzle flashes lit up the night, bullets ricocheted off the ancient stone, and the air filled with the screams of wounded men. Abigail was dragged to the ground by Kahana, who shielded her with his body as dust and debris rained down on them. "Silas!" her father roared over the din, his voice raw with hatred. "Show yourself, you coward!" A cruel laugh echoed from the rocks above. "You should have just taken the deal, Colonel," Silas's voice called out. "Now your greed dies with you, and your pretty little girl, too." But Silas had made one critical miscalculation. He thought Kahana was alone. A high, piercing cry cut through the gunfire, a sound that was pure, untamed wilderness. An answer came from the east, then the west, Kahana's warriors. They had been shadowing him, his silent insurance policy, and now they descended on the ambushers from all sides. The hunters had become the hunted. The battle shifted. It was no longer soldiers versus Apache. It was a desperate three-way fight for survival in the crumbling, torchlit ruins. Apache warriors moved like phantoms through the shadows, their knives silent and deadly. The soldiers, recovering from the initial shock, formed a defensive circle, their training taking over, and Silas's men, caught between two forces they had underestimated, began to panic. In the heart of the chaos, Kahana moved like a vengeful spirit. He was no longer the gentle lover from the creek. He was a war leader in his element, a whirlwind of controlled violence. Abigail watched in awe as he fought, not with rage but with a cold, deadly purpose. Then she saw him, her father. He was pinned down, his leg trapped beneath a fallen beam, and two of Silas's men were closing in on him. His pistol was empty. His face, illuminated by a nearby torch, was pale with the acceptance of his own death. Without thinking, Abigail acted. She still had the rifle Kahana had given her. She raised it, her hands shaking, and took aim. The memory of her father teaching her to shoot years ago on a sunny afternoon that felt like a lifetime away flashed through her mind. She fired. The shot was true. One of the men staggered back, clutching his shoulder. The other spun around, his eyes locking on her. He raised his own rifle, a grin spreading across his face as he prepared to kill the colonel's daughter. But he never got the chance. A tomahawk flew through the air, embedding itself in his chest. He fell without a sound. Kahana was there, pulling her back into the shadows. "Stay down," he commanded, his eyes blazing. From across the clearing, her father stared at her, then at Kahana. He had just seen the man he called a savage save his life, and his daughter save his. The world he thought he knew was being torn apart and rebuilt, moment by bloody moment. The tide of the battle turned quickly. Kahana's warriors were superior fighters, and the soldiers were disciplined and determined. Silas's mercenaries were outmatched and outmaneuvered. The fighting subsided into sporadic shots and the groans of the wounded. And then Silas himself emerged from the shadows, dragging a struggling figure with him. It was Mrs. Hartwell, her face streaked with tears and dirt. "That's enough!" Silas screamed, holding a knife to the woman's throat. "Drop your weapons, or the old bat gets it!" "Let her go, Silas," the colonel growled, struggling to free his leg. "She has nothing to do with this." "She has everything to do with this," Silas cackled. "She's been my eyes and ears in your fort for months, fed me all your patrol schedules, told me exactly when your little girl was sneaking off to meet her lover." Mrs. Hartwell sobbed. "He made me do it! He has my son!" The revelation hung in the air, another layer of betrayal in a night full of it. "It's over, Silas," Kohana said, his voice calm and cold as he stepped into the clearing. He was unarmed, his hands held out to his sides. Your men are dead or captured. Let the woman go. Not a chance, Chief, Silas sneered, his eyes darting around like a cornered rat. I still have one card to play. With a sudden movement, he shoved Mrs. Hartwell to the ground and lunged for Abigail, pulling her in front of him, the knife now pressed against her throat. Everybody stays back, he shrieked, his control finally snapping. Or she dies right here. I'll walk out of here with her, and if anyone follows, I'll send her back to you in pieces. The clearing fell silent. Her father's face was a mask of pure agony. Kohana stood frozen, his powerful body rigid with a helplessness he had never known. Abigail could feel the cold steel of the blade against her skin, smell the sour sweat of Silas's fear. But strangely, she wasn't afraid. She was angry. She looked past Silas's terrified face and met Kohana's eyes. She gave him the slightest, almost imperceptible nod. It was a risk, a wild gamble based on a connection that was deeper than words. Then, she did the last thing Silas expected. She drove her elbow back, hard, into his gut. He grunted, his grip loosening for a fraction of a second. It was all Kohana needed. He moved so fast he was a blur. He wasn't aiming for Silas. He was aiming for the knife. His hand shot out, grabbing Silas's wrist, twisting it with a sickening crack of bone. The knife clattered to the ground. At the same moment, a shot rang out. Colonel Morrison, having finally freed his leg, had fired his rifle. The bullet struck Silas square in the chest. He collapsed in a heap, his dead eyes staring up at the stars he would never see again. Silence descended on the ruins, broken only by the crackle of the torches and the moans of the dying. It was over. The sun was beginning to touch the eastern horizon, painting the sky in shades of gray and pink. The dawn revealed a scene of devastation. Soldiers and Apache warriors stood in the same clearing, their weapons lowered, their faces grimed with smoke and blood. They weren't enemies anymore. They were just survivors. Colonel Morrison limped toward Kohana and Abigail. He looked at his daughter, his eyes full of 1,000 emotions: shame, pride, grief, and a dawning, painful understanding. Then he looked at Kohana. He didn't see a savage. He saw the man who had twice saved his daughter's life. The official report, the colonel said, his voice hoarse, will state that we were ambushed by a renegade war party, that Silas and his men died fighting bravely alongside us, that you, he looked at Kohana, and my daughter, were lost in the chaos, taken. It was a lie, but it was a lie that could buy peace. It would bury the truth about the gold and give them all a chance to start over. You can't go back, Father, Abigail said softly. I know, he said, and the admission seemed to age him 10 years. There's nothing left for me back there but a court-martial and a hangman's noose. I'll disappear. Head south to Mexico. He reached into his coat and pulled out a heavy purse. This was my share of the gold. Take it. Find a life for yourselves somewhere far from here. He pulled Abigail into a fierce, heartbreaking hug. Be happy, child, he whispered into her hair. That's all I ever truly wanted. He released her and faced Kohana, extending a hand. Take care of her. Kohana took his hand. With my life. As dawn broke fully over the Arizona territory, 2 riders headed north into the mountains. They didn't look back. They were riding toward a future they would have to build themselves, a future born from violence and betrayal, but cemented by a love that had refused to break. Behind them, the smoke from the ruins coiled into the morning sky. The soldiers and warriors would go their separate ways, forever bound by the secret of what had really happened in the night. The story would become a legend, whispered around campfires, a tale of a bloody battle and a colonel's daughter lost to the wilderness. But the truth was so much more. It was the story of how a real peace began, not with a treaty signed by politicians, but in the dust and blood of a ruined mission, where 2 enemies chose to trust each other, and a father chose his daughter's love over a mountain of gold. In a hidden valley deep in the mountains, Kohana and Ayana built their new world. Their love, forged in fire, became the foundation of a new generation. Their children, with their father's strength and their mother's spirit, would grow up to be the bridge between two worlds, living proof that hatred was a choice, but love was a force of nature. So, what do you think? Did Colonel Morrison deserve to get away? Or should he have faced justice for his crimes? And what about Abigail? Was she a hero for following her heart, or a traitor for abandoning her people? The line between right and wrong out here in the Wild West is often blurry, written in the dust and washed away by blood. Let me know your verdict in the comments below. If you believe that love is worth fighting for, and that sometimes you have to burn down the old world to build a better one, then hit that subscribe button and join our tribe. We've got a lot more stories to tell about the rebels, the lovers, and the legends who dared to write their own rules. And trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next.